Canada will soon crash into the consequences of a fertility crisis made much worse by the mismanagement of the boomer generation. The demographic collapse tearing up the generational contract may soon destroy one of Canada's greatest achievements, its welfare state. Millennials, Gen Z, and younger are left with a huge mess they somehow need to fix, while they're outvoted by the grey bloc making the decisions for them. So, what happened? Population collapse. Canada was among the first countries to industrialize alongside Britain, Germany, France, and the US, and so its fertility rates began dropping in the 60s after peaking at 3.94 children per woman. But for 54 years, they've been below replacement, standing at 1.25 children per woman in 2024. Compared to South Korea's 0.75, this almost sounds amazing, but it still means population collapse. If fertility stays at 1.25, then 100 Canadians will have 63 kids. When those grow up, they will have 39 kids, who will then have 24 kids, who will have 15. An 85% drop within 4 generations. Many people think there's too many humans anyways, so what's the big deal? Well, at the same time, people started living much longer. So we have a fatal mix of way more grannies and way fewer babies. The real crisis Canadian millennials, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha will have to live through is the massive shift in population composition and the transition period that follows. In 2026, Canada is already one of the oldest countries in the world, with a median age of over 41 years old, ranking in the top 20% of oldest countries. More than 1 in 3 Canadians are over 50. Almost 1 in 4 is older than 65. Only 1 in 7 is a child under the age of 14. Despite its industrial production declining, suffocating bureaucracy, and little economic growth, Canada's system is still chugging along, and it remains a wealthy country part of the G7 and the OECD. The country still has a sizable population and a solid labor force, along with generous social benefits and pension payouts. But soon, the reality of demographics and the boomer mismanagement will hit Canada like a nuclear bomb. Population crash means that a society and culture loses more than just people. The systems and countries we've built can't just be downscaled. Things stop working. Young Canadians are totally screwed. The old ones as well. By 2030, 10 million Canadian baby boomers will retire. This big bulge right here. But because they didn't have nearly enough kids, way fewer younger people will replace them. In 2030 alone, there might be millions of jobs that will be impossible to fill. Fewer people working means fewer taxes and resources for the state. Also, services will decline. Waiting times will increase for everything from getting your passport renewed to doctor's appointments. But the much more urgent issue is retirees. Canada has a pay-as-you-go old age security system, which means that about 20% of today's salaries is directly paid out to pensioners. This sort of worked in the 1960s when there were 8 working Canadians for every retiree, but today, this ratio is down to about 3.2. In the 2030s, it will get closer to 2.7 workers for 1 pensioner. And after retirement, people tend to get really sick and cause the vast majority of healthcare costs. The math ain't mathing, and it actually never really did. Already in the 2000s, governments began to raise the age of retirement, but backtracked it under the Liberal government of 2015, pushing the problem into the future. Well, the future is today. In 2025, the Canadian federal government spent roughly 20% of its annual budget to keep the old age security system afloat. Let's say that again. 1 in 5 Canadian tax dollars is used to pay out old age pensions today, more than on health transfers, child benefits, infrastructure, and defense combined. The wealth of a nation is redistributed from the young and the working to the old and retired. And as the boomers retire, this will only get worse. It's money that could actually be spent on things that help the young and the working part of the population, like incentives to start a family, lower taxes, free childcare, cheap loans to buy a house, investments in education, infrastructure, or business investments. There are so many things that would help young Canadians. But will millennials and Gen Z get to enjoy similar pensions at least? Well, it's not very likely. The current system only works for boomers because their parents had more children and died younger, and because Canada was booming, and also the problem escalated slowly. Young people today don't have all of that. Okay, well, that's a bummer, but at least young Canadians can take care of their own retirement and save money, right? Well, many sure would like to, but taxes and contributions are about 43% of salaries for the average working family and more than 50% in the highest tax brackets. This is one of the highest in the world. Together with the rising cost of living and sluggish wage growth, this makes it especially hard for young Canadians to generate savings for their own retirements. One of the best investments, wealth generators, and place of comfort and security is owning your own home. But due to a mix of poor economic environment, slowing new private investments, increasing mountains of new regulations, making building more expensive, and millions of people immigrating to Canada in the last few decades, the housing supply is behind demand big time. Renting and buying real estate in metropolitan areas where young people actually want to live is so expensive today that even couples with dual incomes and good jobs have a very hard time affording it. The generational contract in Canada is broken, and yet some experts continue to frame all of this as a failure of young people's financial habits, like buying too many lattes or going to yoga classes, simply because they're unmotivated and lazy. The reality is complicated, and misleading narratives permeate the media landscape. Thankfully, there's a solution. Young Canadians are condemned to pay off a huge loan on the future that the older generations have generously granted themselves. And they don't have the power to change this by voting, because Canada's ruling party just has no incentive to help young people. Demographic decline in a democracy is a feedback loop. When seniors are the largest group of voters, politicians make politics for them. This leaves young Canadians facing a hard time building wealth or getting their own homes, which makes them even less willing to start families and have children, even if they wanted to. All of which is making the demographic crash worse. And Canada has become a society that works for the old and relies on the young, making it really hard to create new young people. Baby boomers' lives are affected as well. With an unsustainable old age security system and a crumbling economy, inevitably, millions of older Canadians will have to work much longer than they anticipated. Some already work well into their 70s. Still, seniors and boomers in total own the vast majority of Canada's wealth, and far fewer live in poverty, 5.4% versus 12.6% of working age adults. But the scale of the gap between what workers pay and what is needed to cover boomers' pensions is so enormous that even raising taxes would only buy a bit of time. And an argument can be made that Canadians are already at the peak level of sustainable taxation according to the Laffer curve theory. And beyond pensions, the welfare and healthcare systems that Canadians rely upon may become unaffordable in the 2030s. The vast majority of healthcare costs occur during the last quarter of your life. So just as the healthcare workforce is shrinking due to the demographics, the number of patients will explode. There's already a shortage of medical staff in all provinces, and this is slated to only get worse. The wait time for specialist doctors is already calculated in years. Yeah, I wish I was making that up. Okay, but what about immigration? Whatever your opinion is on immigration, whether it's pro or against, please put a sock in it and ignore it for a moment. We only want to look at it from one perspective. Can immigration solve the population crash? Let's look at the population again. If a country's pyramid looks like this, and you want to stabilize it at the bottom, immigration will not do that. For one, it doesn't actually make your country that much younger. In Canada, the birth rate of most of its immigrants isn't that much higher than the locals. And if new immigrants have more children, they do tend to adjust their fertility rate to the rest of the population within 2 generations. Sure, immigration over the last few decades has delayed the oncoming crash, and in this transition period, will definitely run into some serious worker shortfalls, especially in the healthcare and nursing sector. So zero immigration doesn't seem wise or feasible. But there's a problem. If birth rates stay as low as they are or go down even more, then the Canadian population will continue to shrink. And to keep it stable, it would constantly need to be replenished by new immigrants until they age and themselves need new immigrants to pay off their retirement. No matter if you think this is a good idea or not, it's not actually possible. Birth rates are crashing everywhere. Eventually, immigration around the world will slow down massively. The world is running out of young people. So immigration can delay the issue a bit and ease the consequences, but that's about it. Canada has to solve its demographic crash, or its welfare state and pension systems will break. So, how over is Canada? The demographic crisis is the greatest danger to Canadian living standards and social cohesion, and the same crisis is unfolding in all Western countries. Things are about to escalate in Germany, Italy, France, and Spain. The reality nobody wants to talk about is that solving the demographic crisis will be very painful. It will require sacrifices from everyone, and politicians seem incapable or just plain old unwilling to address it. But to solve the demographic crisis for real, something no nation has done successfully so far might mean doing things that are intensely unpopular with older voters. Instead of spending 20% of Canada's entire budget on the elderly, especially the wealthiest among them, we could invest more of it in families, paying for housing and childcare, and making it an amazing deal to have a big family. Poland is already experimenting with that, giving a total income tax break to families who have 2 children or more. Russia gives maternity capital a large sum payment usable for housing or education for the second child onward. Singapore gives baby bonus cash gifts and also provide co-savings accounts. More than anything, our attitude towards kids and families need to change dramatically. Demographics move slowly, but then they become unstoppable. There's no doubt that the next few decades will be rough, but our societies can decide just how rough it gets. And most importantly, what kind of societies will emerge on the other side.